Welcome. In this video, we will continue unit number 4 as we look at attempts to impose absolutism in England and the effects that it had. Last time we spoke about England, we looked at the Tudor dynasty. Remember, Henry VII came to power in the Wars of the Roses, but he was not an absolute monarch, but did consolidate royal power in his hands. One of the key things he used a lot late in his reign were these royal bonds, where he would demand that nobles show their loyalty by giving him a bond or a loan of money that then he would conveniently kind of never actually pay back. And if anyone would refuse it, well, then it would be seen as evidence that you weren't loyal. And so in a way, like, this was just one type of thing he tended to do to consolidate his power. His son, Henry VIII, of course, practiced Caesaropapism, established the Church of England, and broke from Rome. However, other than similar to his father, demanding royal bonds and charging fees for various things, did not try to demand general power of taxation, called the power of the purse. Rather, that was left with England, and he did not repudiate debt or wipe it away. Some people say that's something the United States should just do. If the government is so much in debt, why don't we just get rid of it and repudiate it, say that it doesn't exist? But that actually causes severe crisis of confidence in the government and causes all sorts of problems that you might not be aware of. And then, of course, his other children ruled, but Elizabeth ruled for the longest time. And like those before her, she largely respected Parliament and sort of co-ruled with a lot of power, but left much of the power in the hands of the Parliament. So that brings us to this guy here, James I, who was one of the Tudor cousins from Scotland. He was the great-grandson of Henry VIII's sister, who went and married the King of Scotland, James IV. So technically, this guy, don't get bogged up on this, but he was James VI of Scotland. He was the sixth King of Scotland named James, but he becomes the first King of England who's named James, and he's more famous for that, so I'll always refer to him as James I. He's famous for commissioning the King James translation of the Bible. He didn't write it all himself. He sponsored it and took it as a major project of his rule. And he is famous. He promoted in a book the idea of a free monarchy. Doesn't mean it cost nothing. It was free, meaning free from interference from his own nobles, from a parliament, from the church, a monarch who was totally free. Basically, an absolute monarch, one that had all power in his hands, one whose power comes from God alone, therefore divine right theory. And he basically becomes a firm Anglican. Remember, one of the key tenets of the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, is that the king is the head of the church. And a group that fell out of favor were the more radical Calvinist-leaning Protestants called Puritans, who felt suppressed under his rule. He gets into conflict with Parliament and begins to just issue taxes. And when Parliament would object to these things, he would simply dissolve Parliament, like you might take a cube of sugar or a substance in science and you put it in water and dissolve it. You effectively make it go away. It still exists, but it's not there anymore. You don't see it. And that's what you can do to Parliament. Imagine if, for example, Congress is trying to impeach a president, and the president could simply dissolve the Congress and make them go away. That would certainly make life easier for presidents, and it would make them more like a king. And so the kings had that power. Now, when James I died, his son Charles became king of both Scotland and England. And his rule will lead to the causes of the English Civil War. So here's King Charles I. So King Charles did several things. He showed a disregard for the right of habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is a right that we have in the United States Constitution. It's a right that they had in England, which is when you're arrested, you have the right to be brought before a judge and charged. You can't simply be thrown in jail on suspicion of having committed a crime and left to languish there. You had the right to be brought before a judge, and the king's agents, the law enforcement, had to show some evidence, not proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but reasonable amount of evidence that you had committed the crime you're accused of. And he abused that and simply left people in jail without bringing them to a judge. He continued to demand taxes that without Parliament's consent, and to wrangle and push and punish people that wouldn't pay. Is insistent on the Anglican Book of Prayer, for, pushing Caesaropapism, and many Puritans object to this. Some of them grumbled and began to threaten violence. Some emigrated or became these pilgrims. If you kind of notice the dates here, 1625 is when he becomes king. This is shortly after the Pilgrims immigrate to Massachusetts. And so this is and the Pilgrims were basically Puritans, this group of people who felt that the king was against them. Members of Parliament send King Charles what was called the Petition of Right, basically a petition to acknowledge their rights. In exchange, they would agree to accept and pay a new tax as long as he would agree to stop demanding new taxes on his own authority. Everyone agrees to it, and he promptly dissolves the Parliament and rules without them for 11 years after having been given that new tax. And this royally pisses everyone off. Get it, royally? It royally pisses them off, but he's able to kind of get away with it as the nobles and the Parliament members are seething about this sort of at their homes, in their homelands. But due to a rebellion in Scotland, Charles needed more money to fund a new army to go defend and then attack rebels in Scotland. And so he calls Parliament together, and they won't have anything to do with what he wants. What they start doing is debating all the things he's done that they don't like. And he can't just dissolve them because he needs the money. And they start, having hearings and inquiries, and including trying and executing his own ministers, including one of the chief archbishops of the country and one of Charles's main advisors, Archbishop Laud, is executed on the authority of Parliament, and the king doesn't step in because that's how much he needs money. And, he is afraid if he tells them to dissolve, they won't. So finally, he sends troops in to arrest the certain leaders who are the MPs, or members of Parliament, and he tries to dissolve them by force. They had heard about this plot to arrest them, and so they escape and flee the capital, and they accuse him of tyranny or unjust rule. The leader, increasingly, of the New Model Army, the Parliament Army, the Roundheads, is Oliver Cromwell, who's pictured here. It's pictured here. And we see the two sides. For about 7 years in the middle of the 1600s, you had the New Model Army, also called the Roundheads, due to their kind of bowl hair, the haircut they had that looked like a bowl cut. Their leader and general was Puritan Oliver Cromwell, and many of the Puritans coalesced toward the New Model Army. The King's Army were called the Cavaliers. He had many allies, certain nobles, and it was very much an Anglican group. King Charles, in the end, loses. You don't need to know about John Pym's covenant. And they put him on trial. This is quite a thing. We've seen this in other historical examples, and so maybe we've grown dull to this, but it's a king's own people putting him on trial for tyranny, for being an unjust king. This shocked people. Many people said, well, you can't do that. I'm a free monarch, just like my father. You can't do that. But they do, and they commit regicide, which is the killing of a king. And when you do this, when you execute the king, those who support this are committed. Regicide is worse than homicide or any other killing that someone could commit, and it sticks with you. Anyone who supported this, you are, in fact, that label sticks to you, like someone who commits adultery as an adulterer, someone who supported regicide they're called a regicide. Like you're someone who participated in that thing, and anyone who opposes this will forever remember this about you and will never forgive you or forget about it. And so if your side ever loses power, you are likely to be executed for supporting the execution of the king. This is a very serious step. But they do, and they promote this general, Oliver Cromwell, to be their leader. They start by thinking that it will be kind of a republic, but when the parliament starts doing things Cromwell doesn't like, he has the army led by Colonel Pride to purge parliament, leaving only behind a rump called the rump parliament, the little bit of it that was left after they kicked out all but a few dozen of the members of parliament. They pass a constitution called the Instrument of Government that effectively gives Cromwell Lord Protector status over the so-called Commonwealth. It's not an empire, it's not a republic, it's a Commonwealth where Oliver is the Lord Protector and he looks out for the common good of all, and he's elected for life. Effectively, it's a bit of a Puritan theocracy, government by religious rules, where they, one of the things they're known for is for closing down a lot of things that are fun, but also believed to promote indecency. So they close down the taverns, the theaters, the dance halls. And there is a Puritan Presbyterian preference. So Catholics are very much persecuted, and even Anglicans are sort of out of favor. They're tolerated more than Catholics, but they're out of favor. When Cromwell dies, there are those who want it to continue under his son, but that doesn't work. And many of the other great nobles and lords of the land want to move England in a different direction, back in the old direction. And so they basically petition for a return or restoration of Charles's own son, Charles II. He is relatively easygoing. He does not persecute and execute as many of the people who killed his own father as you might think. He's a compromiser. He he knew exactly what happened to his father, and he tried very hard not to offend a lot of the groups. He restored more of the Anglican Church. Some people think he had, even from his time in hiding while they had murdered his father, he had gone to France, that he had potentially become a closeted Roman Catholic, as his own brother did, which will come up in a second. But he favored accommodation and trying to avoid conflict and maintain his power. But he died without a legitimate son, and his younger brother James becomes James II and rises to be king, and he is a Catholic, which is a small minority in England by this time. And he was the brother of Charles, but raised in France, and begins appointing the few other Catholics who were noblemen to high office and giving them lots of authority. And there are many who, for religious reasons or for kind of political religious reasons, are upset about this. He also begins taking after his father and his grandfather and defining himself as a free, absolute monarch. Many people in Parliament don't like him. It looks like a whole nother civil war is about to begin, but it doesn't. They invite his own daughter, Mary of Orange, and her husband, William, who is the stadholder of the Netherlands, to come from the Netherlands to England and take over. The map of the war. Here is Charles II, James II, and his own daughter, Mary, and her husband, William. And James flees. He takes off and doesn't want to risk losing his head, and he never returns. William and Mary, though, they owe their position not directly to God, right? Parliament had to invite them. So they owe Parliament. In exchange, they agree to the English Bill of Rights and establish a limited, not an absolute monarchy. And this bloodless overthrow is referred to as the Glorious Revolution because the king fled, a new king and queen came in, and no one was killed. They accept limits to their power, such as the power of the purse, not to suspend laws or dissolve Parliament. They do agree to ban Catholics from high office, and they affirm the right of habeas corpus. And this firmly establishes a mixed government where Parliament and the king and queen both have meaningful power. Thanks for watching.